Nobody else was going. That was all she said. Burned hands. And ash in her hair. No shoes left on her feet. A homeless girl who owned nothing standing in front of a burning building, holding a child who wasn't hers, in a neighborhood that had never once looked at her twice. And the moment Jackson Hayes, a man feared by half of Phoenix, saw her face, something inside him cracked open that he didn't know how to close. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The night it happened, Emily Carter was doing what she did every night around 2 in the morning. And she was counting, not money, not stars. She was counting the number of apartment windows that still had lights on, because the ones with lights meant somebody was awake, and awake people sometimes open their doors, and sometimes an open door meant a conversation, and a conversation meant even for just a few minutes, she didn't feel completely alone in the world. She had gotten very good at finding small things to hold on to. That was the skill nobody told you about when you ended up on the streets. Not how to find food, though she had learned that too. Not how to stay warm, though Phoenix in December could surprise you with how cold it got when the sun went down. The real skill, the one that separated the people who survived from the people who disappeared, was knowing how to locate the smallest possible reason to keep going. For Emily Carter, on the night of December 14th, that reason was counting lit windows. She had 37 of them in her view from the concrete ledge outside the old Maricopa Arms apartment building on West Van Buren Street when the world changed. And she didn't hear it first. She felt it. And a deep, low vibration in the soles of her feet, coming up through the concrete, the kind of pressure that doesn't have a sound yet, but already knows it's going to be loud. Then the smell hit her sharp and chemical, wrong, the kind of smell that bypasses your brain entirely and goes straight to the part of you that's still an animal, the part that knows, before thought, before language, before reason, that something is on fire and it is close. She stood up. The third floor of the Maricopa Arms was glowing orange from the inside, not flickering, not soft, glowing like something inside those walls had been waiting a long time to finally let go, and it had just decided tonight was the night. Emily's backpack was on the ledge beside her. She had $13 in the front pocket, a half-eaten protein bar, a phone with a cracked screen and 12% battery, and a folder thick, worn at the edges, stuffed with papers she had been carrying for 4 months. That folder was the most important thing she owned. She grabbed the backpack and slung it over one shoulder without thinking about it. The first scream came from the second floor, then another. Then the sound of windows opening, voices overlapping, that particular kind of human chaos that comes when people realize at the same time that something has gone terribly wrong and none of them know what to do about it. Emily was already moving toward the building. She didn't make a decision. That was the thing she would struggle to explain later. In the police statements and the interviews and the conversations that came after, she didn't stand there and weigh the options. Her feet were just moving, the way they moved when she heard her mother call for her, the back bedroom of the house in Glendale, the way they moved when instinct was smarter than thinking. A man in a bathrobe ran past her going in the opposite direction. He didn't look at her. 2 women in pajamas stood on the sidewalk, one of them holding a cat, both of them staring up with their mouths open. They didn't look at her either. A teenager, maybe 16, stood frozen near the entrance with his phone raised, filming. He glanced at her for exactly 1 second, then looked back at his screen. Emily pushed through the front door of the Maricopa Arms. The lobby smelled like burnt plastic and something older underneath it, something biological that she didn't want to name. The overhead lights were still on, which was almost worse, the normalcy of fluorescent light against the wrongness of the smoke curling down from the stairwell, moving slowly, deliberately, like it knew it had all the time in the world. She took the stairs, second floor empty, doors closed, smoke coming under 3 of them in thin gray lines. She kept going. Third floor, the heat hit her at the top of the staircase like a wall. Not warmth, heat. The kind that makes your eyes water and your lungs want to reconsider every decision that led you to this moment. The hallway stretched out in front of her, 5 doors on each side. Most of them had been abandoned. She knew that from her weeks outside this building, watching, noting the patterns of light and movement, the way she'd learned to note everything, because information was another form of survival. But 3 units on the 3rd floor still had residents. She was almost certain of that. Unit 301, the door was open, banging against the frame in the draft, created by whatever window had already blown out. And she looked inside, empty. Couch overturned, TV still on, someone had left in a hurry. Unit 303, she knocked. Nothing. Knocked again, harder. Anybody in there? Her voice sounded strange to her, rougher than she expected, like she'd been holding it in so long that now it came out wrong. No answer. She tried the handle, locked, she moved on. Unit 305, she was already at the door when she heard it. Not a scream, worse than a scream, a cough, small, rhythmic. The cough of a child who couldn't get enough air and was trying anyway, over and over, the stubborn and unconscious determination of a small body refusing to stop trying. Emily hit the door with her shoulder once, twice it didn't move. She took a step back, looked at the handle, looked at the door frame, and remembered something her mother's landlord had told her once when she was about 15. Cheap doors have cheap frames, and cheap frames give before the door does. She hit it low, near the lock, with the flat of her foot, and the frame cracked. She hit it again, the door swung in. The smoke inside Unit 305 was different from the hallway. Thicker, lower. Moving in waves that meant the fire was already inside the walls, working its way through the space between things, invisible and everywhere at once. Hello, she called. Is somebody in here? Hello? The coughing again from the back of the unit, from behind a closed door on the right side of the short hallway. Emily got low. She had read somewhere once, that smoke rose, that you were supposed to stay below it, and her body remembered this even if her mind was too occupied to consciously retrieve the information. She moved fast, bent at the waist, one hand trailing the wall. She pushed open the door at the end of the hallway. The boy was on the floor between the bed and the wall. He'd done the right thing, gotten low, gotten away from the window where the smoke was worst, and he'd been there long enough that he was barely conscious. 7 or 8 years old, dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat, eyes half open, looking at her with the particular expression of a child who has been scared for so long that fear has used itself up and left something quieter behind. Hey, Emily dropped to her knees in front of him. Hey, look at me, can you hear me? He blinked, his mouth moved. My name's Emily. I'm going to get you out. Can you put your arms around my neck? He blinked again. Slower this time, I need you to try. Okay, I know you're tired, I know it hurts, but I need you to try. His arms came up, weak, trembling, but they came up. She pulled him against her chest, got her arms under him, and stood. Something in the ceiling above them groaned, a sound like a building arguing with itself about how much longer it was willing to hold on. Emily did not look up. She moved. The hallway was worse than when she'd entered it. The smoke was thicker now, and there was an orange glow at the far end, not a window, not a light, the actual color of fire, working its way around the corner. She could feel it on her face, the radiant heat that makes your skin tighten and your eyes dry out. And she understood, in a very calm and matter-of-fact way, that she had perhaps 3 minutes, maybe less, before this hallway became impassable. The boy made a sound against her shoulder. Not a word. A sound small and exhausted, and trusting in a way that felt like a hand around her heart. She moved faster. The stairs, the 2nd floor, the 1st floor. Her legs were shaking. She was 5'4" and 118 pounds, and she had not eaten a full meal in 3 days. And the boy was heavier than he looked, the way sleeping children always are. The weight of someone who has surrendered entirely to the body carrying them. And she did not stop, she did not slow down. She came through the front door of the Maricopa Arms and into the cold December air, and a sound went through the crowd outside, not a cheer, not yet, something more involuntary than that, And the sound a group of people makes when something happens that they hadn't believed was possible and they need a second to catch up to it. And Emily walked 6 steps, then her legs made a unilateral decision to stop. She sank to her knees on the sidewalk, still holding the boy, and she heard the crowd moving around her, voices getting louder, hands she didn't recognize reaching toward her, and the boy pulled back just enough to look at her face. Are you okay? He asked. His voice was small and ruined from the smoke, barely more than a whisper. Emily Carter, who had not cried in front of another person in longer than she could remember, laughed instead short, surprised, the kind of laugh that isn't funny at all, but comes out anyway because the alternative would take something from her that she wasn't ready to give. I'm okay, she said. Are you okay? He nodded very seriously, the way children nod when they are telling you something they need you to believe. Good, she said, good. The fire department arrived 4 minutes later. A paramedic, young, blonde, with the efficient movements of someone who has seen too much to waste time being shocked, came toward Emily with a blanket and a medical kit. He stopped when he saw her hands. She looked down. She hadn't noticed when it happened. The palms of both hands were red, raw, already beginning to blister in 2 places on the right and 1 on the left. She had held them flat against the doorframe when she shouldered through it and hadn't registered the heat at the time, the way you sometimes don't register pain until it's safe to notice it. I'm fine, she said. Ma'am, the boy, she said. His name as she looked at the child, who was sitting beside her now, wrapped in the blanket the paramedic had offered, being examined by a second medic. I don't know his name. He needs to be checked first. We've got him, the paramedic said. Let me see your hands. She let him look. She answered his questions. Yes, she'd been inside. Yes, she'd been on the 3rd floor. No, she didn't have any other injuries she was aware of. Yes, she was sure. She watched the building over his shoulder while he worked, watched the fire crew, moving with the controlled urgency that was their version of the same instinct that had moved her feet 40 minutes ago. The crowd on the sidewalk had grown. People from other buildings, people from the street, the particular gravity of disaster that pulls human beings toward the thing they should probably be moving away from. Someone was taking photographs. Several people were still filming on their phones. Nobody had asked Emily her name. Nobody had offered her the second blanket that the paramedic was holding over his arm. Nobody had said, what can we do for you? You just ran into a burning building. What do you need? That was not bitterness exactly. It was something Emily had long since filed under the category of the way things are. She was good at that filing. She had a whole system for it. She pulled her backpack still on her back. She had carried it through a burning building and out again without once thinking about it and checked the front pocket. The folder was there. The $13 were there. The protein bar was gone, which meant she must have dropped it somewhere. She noted this without distress. She would find something else. It was the boy who brought Jackson Hayes to her. Noah. That was the boy's name. She learned when a firefighter crouched down beside him and asked him gently, the way men who work around trauma learn to speak to children what his name was, where his dad was there someone they should call? Noah Hayes, the boy said with that same serious authority. My dad is Jackson. He was at the shop. He always leaves his number with Mrs. Garcia next door, but Mrs. Garcia already went away before the fire, so I don't know where. It's okay, the firefighter said. We'll find him. Emily stored the name, filed it, went back to watching the building. She was thinking about the folder in her backpack. She had been thinking about it in the background of everything for the last hour. Because this building, this specific building, the Maricopa Arms on West Van Buren, was not just a building she happened to sleep outside of. It was the building at the center of 11 pages of documentation she had been collecting since September. Maintenance requests that had been ignored. Inspection reports that had been falsified. A heating system that the building manager had told 4 separate tenants was being repaired for going on 7 months. Electrical wiring in the 3rd floor units that a contractor named Bud Sewell, had flagged as a fire risk in writing in August in a report that had somehow disappeared from the city's filing system. She hadn't been sitting outside the Maricopa Arms because it was comfortable. She'd been sitting outside it because she was watching it. Because she had known, in the careful, evidence-based way that she had been trained to think before she lost everything, that something like this was going to happen. And nobody had listened to her, not the city housing office, not the local news station she'd emailed twice, not the legal aid clinic that had put her on a waiting list in October and hadn't called her back, not the city councilman's constituent services line, where a woman named Sandra had been very polite and very thorough about explaining all the ways in which Emily's concerns were very valid, and also not anything anyone was currently able to address. Not one single person with power had listened to a homeless 20-year-old woman with a backpack and burned hands and no address to put on a form. But the building had burned anyway. And a boy named Noah Hayes was sitting on the sidewalk alive. And Emily's hands hurt. And she thought, now somebody will have to listen. Jackson Hayes arrived 22 minutes after the fire department. She knew it was him before anyone told her, because the crowd did a thing that crowds do. They parted. Not dramatically. Not consciously. Just the instinctive social geometry of people adjusting their positions around someone they understand, without being told, has a particular kind of weight. He was tall. She would have put him at 6'2" or 6'3", with the wide-shouldered, thick-necked build of a man who had been physical his whole life. He was wearing a leather vest over a flannel shirt, and even at 2:30 in the morning, on a December sidewalk, surrounded by fire trucks and flashing lights and 24 strangers, he moved like someone who was very sure of his right to be wherever he was. There were 2 other men behind him, similar vests, similar energy, hanging back at exactly the right distance to be present without being intrusive. He scanned the crowd. He found the paramedics. He found Noah. And Emily watched the thing happen to his face that she had watched happen to her own mother's face. Once, years ago, when Emily had late coming home from school, and her mother had been standing at the window, and the moment Emily came through the door, her mother's face did what Jackson Hayes's face did. Right now it broke open, just for a second, all the terror it had been holding, behind the locked door of function and forward motion, and then it closed again. But something of what had been inside it stayed, the way water leaves a mark even after the surface is dry. He crossed to his son in 8 strides. He dropped to his knees on the concrete without hesitating, without caring who was watching, and he put his hands on either side of Noah's face, checking him the way you check something precious that has been close to being lost, the inventory of a person who needs to know that every part of the thing he loves is still there and still whole. "Hey," he said. His voice was rough, quiet. "Hey, bud." "Dad." Noah's voice cracked on the single syllable, and all the composure the boy had managed to hold together since Emily had pulled him out of that building chose that exact moment to let go. He started crying, the helpless, full-bodied crying of a child who has been very brave for as long as he could stand it. Jackson wrapped both arms around him and pulled him in and said nothing. He didn't need to say anything. Emily watched them. She had begun quietly and methodically to understand that she should leave. Her hands had been bandaged. The boy was safe. She had given the paramedic a false last name and a false address, an old habit learned from months of encounters with official people who meant well and made things worse. And there was no particular reason for her to stay, and every practical reason to go, because the longer she stayed in one place, more likely someone was to start asking questions she didn't want to answer. She had one hand on her backpack strap, was calculating the least conspicuous direction to walk, when Noah pulled back from his father and pointed directly at her. "That's Emily," the boy said. "She came in and got me." Jackson Hayes turned his head. He looked at her. Emily stopped moving. He stood up slowly, with the controlled, deliberate movement of a man who has learned to stand up slowly so that other people don't feel rushed or threatened by him. And he walked toward her, and the crowd did its geometry again, creating a clear path between them that felt less like courtesy and more like the crowd collectively deciding it did not want to be between these two people at this moment. Stopped 3 feet away. He looked at her not up and down, not the inventory of appearance that people usually ran over her, and the rapid assessment that landed on the worn clothes and the backpack, and the general condition of someone who slept outside and decided it had all the information it needed. He looked at her face, the way doctors looked at you when they needed to understand something, or the way her mother had looked at her when she was trying to figure out what Emily was feeling before Emily had figured it out herself. My son says you went in and carried him out, Jackson said. Yes. From the 3rd floor? Yes. Before the fire department got here? Yes. He was quiet for a moment. The fire crackled behind them. Somewhere to their left, a radio squawked. Why? He said. It was such a simple question. She had been expecting something else, gratitude, or official-sounding language, or the careful, performative version of emotion that people produced in public situations like this. She had not been expecting the plain, direct, almost confused honesty of that single word. Why, he asked again, quieter this time, like he was asking himself as much as her. Emily looked at him. She looked at Noah over his shoulder, wrapped in the blanket, watching them with the clear, unencumbered attention of a child not yet learned to look at things sideways. Because nobody else was going, she said. Jackson Hayes looked at her for a long time. He had the face of a man who had heard a lot of answers in his life and had developed a reliable sense of which ones were real and which ones were performances, and something in his expression shifted in a way that was very small and very significant, the way a door shifts when a key has finally found the right tumbler. What's your name, he said. Emily Carter. You live in the building? She paused. No, he waited. She could feel the crowd around them, the phone still out, the paramedics somewhere to her right, the firefighters behind her, and the particular social pressure of a moment that had become too public for comfortable honesty. She thought about the false name she had given. She thought about the folder in her backpack. She thought about the 11 pages she had been carrying for 4 months, the proof that this building had been disaster waiting to happen, and the months she had spent trying to hand that proof to someone who could use it. I was outside, she said. I sleep out here sometimes. Near the building. Another pause. You're homeless, Jackson said. Not a question, not unkind. Factual, the way he might say. You have brown hair. You're about 20 years old. You have bandages on both hands. Yes, Emily said. He nodded slowly. You ran into a burning building, he said. For a kid you didn't know. When you had nothing. I had everything I own. Emily said, and she adjusted the backpack strap on her shoulder, and for some reason that small gesture, the entirely practical and unsentimental habit of a person who never set down the only thing she had, made something move across Jackson Hayes' face that was complicated and that she didn't fully understand. Emily Carter, he said. Yes, he put out his hand. Not the friendly, casual handshake of a social introduction. The kind of handshake that means something, the kind that was once used to seal agreements, to mark that something had been witnessed and acknowledged. She looked at his hand. She put out her bandaged right hand and shook it. His grip was careful around the bandages, deliberate. Jackson Hayes, he said, that's my son. I know. I heard someone say, he said. I know. He's 8. He's brave. Emily said, and she meant it, because the boy had been brave, in the small and real and quiet way that children are brave when they don't have a choice and they keep trying anyway. Jackson Hayes glanced back at his son, then back at her. Where are you going tonight? He said. Emily considered the question with the care it deserved. I don't know yet, she said. I'll figure it out. Do you want? I'm okay, she said. He stopped. He read her face. He nodded. All right, he said. All right. He reached into the front pocket of his jeans and pulled out a card, plain white, no title, just a name and a number, and he held it out to her. That's my number, my real number, if you need something. Anything, not just tonight. Emily took the card. She looked at it for a moment. She put it in the front pocket of her backpack next to the folder. Thank you for not making a big thing of this, she said. Earned. He looked at her with an expression that she would think about later. Earned. In the quiet of whatever alley or doorway she found asleep in that night. Earned. And that she would eventually categorize as earned. Recognition. Earned. The expression of someone who sees something true and knows it and doesn't need to perform the knowing. Earned. Thank you for going inside, he said. She nodded once. Earned. She turned to leave. She had taken 4 steps when he spoke again. Behind her, quiet enough that she almost missed it in the noise of the crowd. And Emily. She stopped. Didn't turn around, it mattered, he said. Earned. What you did tonight, it mattered to me. She stood very still for a moment. Earned. Then she kept walking. She did not look back. Earned. She would not let herself look back. Earned. Because she had learned. Earned. Through months of a life that had stripped away most of her defenses. Earned. That some things were too important to look at directly. Earned. That some things, if you let yourself turn around and face them at full intensity, would break through the last wall between you and the grief you had been holding at arm's length for longer than you wanted to admit. Earned. She had saved a child tonight. She had burned her hands. Earned. She had everything she owned on her back. Somewhere in Phoenix, a man whose son she had carried out of a burning building had just said it mattered. Earned. She tucked that away. Filed it in a different folder than the ones marked the way things are. Filed it somewhere she didn't have a name for yet, but that felt important to protect. Earned. She turned left at the end of the block. The cold air found her. Earned. She pulled her jacket tighter with her bandaged hands. Earned. Very carefully. Earned. Because the blisters were beginning to make themselves known with a clarity that analgesics had temporarily suppressed. Earned. And she thought about the folder in her backpack. Earned. And she thought about the building burning behind her. And she thought about the 11 pages and the 7 months and the electrical report that had disappeared from the city's filing system. Earned. She thought about all of it, and she kept walking. Earned. Because she had learned that keeping walking was sometimes the only form of faith available to a person. You kept walking. Something would come next. Something always came next. Earned. She kept walking. She found a doorway 6 blocks from the Maricopa Arms and sat down with her back against the wall and her knees pulled up to her chest, and she did not sleep. And her hands kept her awake. The blisters had moved past the stage where they were merely uncomfortable and into the stage where they had opinions, loud ones, and transmitted in a continuous low fire that ran from her palms up to her wrists and made it impossible to find a position where she could forget about them for more than a few seconds at a time. And the paramedic had given her 4 ibuprofen and told her to see a doctor in the morning. And she had taken the ibuprofen and said yes. Earned. Of course. Earned. In the tone she had perfected over months, agreeable. Earned. Cooperative. Earned. The tone that made official people feel they had discharged their responsibility and could move on to the next problem. Earned. She was not going to see a doctor in the morning. She knew what a doctor visit without insurance cost. She knew what an ER visit cost. Earned. She had learned those numbers the hard way. Earned. The way you learned most things when the safety net you didn't know you were standing on got pulled out from under you. Earned. Which was earned. All at once. Earned. With no warning. Earned. And no one around to explain what had just happened. Earned. She sat in the doorway and looked at the card Jackson Hayes had given her. Earned. Plain white, no logo, no title, just a name J. Hayes and a 10-digit number printed in clean, plain type. Earned. The kind of card a man carried when he didn't need to advertise what he was, because the people who needed to know already knew, and the people who didn't need to know weren't going to find out from a business card. Earned. She turned it over, blank on the back. She put it in her pocket, the front one, the one she patted in the dark, sometimes just to confirm the folder was still there. Earned. The folder and the card, side by side. She thought about Noah Hayes, the way he had looked at her when she'd asked him to put his arms around her neck. Earned. The exhausted, earned, trusting compliance of a child who had decided, earned, in the middle of a burning room, earned, that she was someone worth trusting. Earned. She didn't know why that particular memory kept coming back with such force. Earned. Maybe because it had been a long time since anyone had looked at her that way. Earned. Like she was enough. Like she was sufficient for the moment that needed her. Earned. She thought about Jackson's face when he had turned from his son and found her standing there. Earned. She thought about the question he had asked. Why she had given him the honest answer. Earned. She always gave honest answers when she was asked honest questions, which happened less often than you might think. Earned. Most people who talked to her didn't actually want answers. Earned. They wanted to feel something and then move on. And the interaction itself was the point, not what got said inside it. Earned. Jackson Hayes had wanted an actual answer. Earned. She tucked that observation somewhere useful and watched the street get lighter at the edges, the slow graying of Phoenix before sunrise, and she made a list of the things she needed to do in the next 24 hours. And the list was not short. She started with the most immediate item. Earned. She needed to find a place to charge her phone. Earned. The library on Encanto Boulevard opened at 9, and Emily was outside waiting when the doors unlocked. Earned. The librarian at the front desk, a small woman in her 60s named Donna, who had learned Emily's name 3 weeks ago and deployed it with the particular warmth of someone who understood that being called by your name was not nothing. Earned. It was sometimes the whole difference, looked at Emily's bandaged hands and stopped mid-greeting. And what happened? There was a fire last night on Van Buren. And I'm okay. Donna looked at her for a long moment with the expression of a woman who had been told I'm okay by people who were not okay enough times to have developed a very precise sense of when the phrase was accurate. And sit down, Donna said. I have some proper bandages in the back. And you don't have to sit down, Emily. She sat down. And Donna came back with a first aid kit that was significantly better stocked than what the paramedic had used, and she unwrapped Emily's hands with a focused and quiet efficiency that felt like being taken care of without being made to feel like a burden, which was rarer than it should have been. And she replaced the gauze and applied something that stung for about 4 seconds and then soothed. And she didn't ask questions while she worked, which Emily appreciated more than she could easily say. The fire on Van Buren was on the news this morning, Donna said finally, when both hands were rewrapped. Okay. They said a young woman pulled a child out of the building before the fire department arrived. And Emily said nothing. Donna looked child. Emily said, did they say if he was okay? They said he was treated and released. And no serious injuries. Donna paused. They described the woman as a good Samaritan. And they don't have her name. Good, Emily said. Why is that good? Emily thought about how to answer that honestly, without creating more conversation than she had energy for this morning. Because I have other things to do today, she said. And I don't want people looking for me. Donna studied her for another moment, then stood and packed the first aid kit away with the same efficient movements she'd used to unpack it. There's an outlet near the third table on the left, she said. Your usual spot? I'll bring you some coffee in a little while. Emily stood, adjusted her backpack, and paused. Donna. Thank you. Don't, Donna said, not unkindly. You saved a child last night. I put some bandages on your hands. We're nowhere close to even. Emily carried that with her to the third table on the left and sat down and plugged in her phone and opened the folder. 11 pages. She had been collecting them since the second week of September, when she had still been new enough to the streets that she was trying to understand the systems around her rather than simply survive inside them. That was a nursing school habit. One of the professors had called it environmental assessment. The practice of looking at a space and asking, what are the risks here? What has already been flagged and ignored? What is the gap between what is supposed to happen and what is actually happening? She had been sitting outside the Maricopa Arms for the second night when she'd found the first document. It had been in the dumpster behind the building. A folder, partially water damaged, that someone had thrown away with what appeared to be either carelessness or deliberately performative carelessness, the kind of disposal that says, I want this gone, but I don't want to be seen making it go. Inside was a maintenance request log, 47 individual requests from residents over the previous 8 months. Items checked as completed that she would come to understand from subsequent observation had not been completed. Dates that didn't line up. Names of contractors who, when she looked them up on the city's licensing database at this same library on this same computer, did not appear to hold current licenses. She had pulled that folder out of the dumpster and put it in her backpack, and then she had started looking. Over the following weeks, she had collected a copy of an inspection report she'd obtained by request from the city housing office, which listed 14 deficiencies. 11 of which were marked resolved in the building's official filings, but which she could observe from the outside were not resolved. Earned a printout of the City Council's public housing safety database with the Maricopa Arms' entry highlighted, showing 3 years of declining compliance scores. Earned a screenshot of an online community forum where 7 current and former tenants described their experiences with maintenance requests that vanished and complaints that went unanswered. Earned and most significantly, a copy of a contractor's electrical assessment she had obtained this one through a contact she had made at the legal aid clinic, and a paralegal named Marcus who felt bad about the waiting list and occasionally passed her public record documents as what he called professional courtesy that identified the third-floor wiring as a Category 3 fire risk requiring immediate remediation. And that report was dated August 9th. The fire at the Maricopa Arms was December 14th. Earned 4 months and 5 days between a written warning that the building was a fire risk and a fire. Emily spread the 11 pages on the table in front of her and looked at them. Earned. Then she picked up her phone, 31% now. Earned. Charging, and she called the number for the Phoenix Housing and Residential Integrity Division, earned, which was the office she had called 3 times before, earned, and each time been transferred to a voicemail that did not call back. Earned. This time someone answered. She was so surprised that for a moment she didn't say anything. Earned. Housing and Residential, this is Kevin. Hi, my name is Emily Carter. Earned. I'm calling about the fire last night at the Maricopa Arms apartment building on West Van Buren. Earned. I have documentation of multiple safety violations at that property that were reported and not acted on, and I'd like to speak to someone about providing that documentation to whoever is investigating the fire. And a pause. The sound of someone at a desk recalibrating. And, ma'am, the investigation of last night's fire is being handled by the fire marshal's office, and we don't. And I understand that. I'm not asking you to investigate the fire. And I'm asking you to tell me who I should speak to about the safety violations that preceded it. And because I have 11 pages of documentation, and I've been trying to put it in front of the right person for 4 months, and I would like to stop leaving voicemails. And another pause. Longer this time. Can I get a number where you can be reached? Earned. You can get a number where you can reach me when I have Wi-Fi or I'm in range of a signal, which is most hours between 9 in the morning and 6 at night. Earned. The number is, she gave him her cracked screen phone number. And my name is Emily Carter. I am one of the people who was present at the fire last night. And I will not be difficult to find if someone actually wants to find me. And she hung up. Her hands were shaking slightly, which she recognized as the particular vibration of adrenaline meeting sleep deprivation and inadequate food, and which she had also learned to manage by breathing slowly through her nose until it passed. She breathed. It passed. Earned. She picked up page 7 of the folder, the electrical assessment, and read through it again. Earned. Carefully. Earned. The way she read everything. Earned. Looking not just at what it said, but at what it implied. Earned. What it assumed. Earned. What it left out and why. Earned. She had been 2 semesters from completing her nursing degree when her mother's diagnosis had changed everything. Earned. That was a fact she rarely let herself think about directly. Earned. Because it was the kind of fact that earned, looked it full on, earned, made it very hard to proceed with the business of the day. Earned. Her mother had been sick for 2 years before the diagnosis. Earned. And Emily had managed at the doctor's appointments. Earned. The medications. Earned. The adjustments to their shared apartment in Glendale. Earned. Her own class schedule wrapped around her mother's needs, the way ivy wraps around a structure, following the available light. Earned. She had been managing it, earned, and she had been good at managing it, earned. And then the diagnosis had been worse than either of them had been prepared for, earned, and managing it had required more, earned. And the more had meant her financial aid situation had changed, earned, and the changed financial aid had meant the apartment had become impossible. And then her mother had gone to live with Emily's aunt in Tucson because there was no other option, earned. And Emily had found herself in Phoenix with a backpack and a phone and a level of practical competence that was in many ways completely useless without a roof to practice it under. And that was the whole story. She did not tell it often because it was a story that made people uncomfortable in ways they didn't know how to manage. And it didn't fit the categories they had available. It wasn't about addiction or mental illness or bad choices in the way people expected. And It was about a girl who had tried very hard and whose circumstances had outpaced her trying. And that story made people more uncomfortable than the other ones because it was harder to locate the point where they could have done something differently, earned, which meant there was no distance between her story and theirs. And that was a distance people needed, earned. She understood it. She didn't hold it against them, earned. She just lived with the reality of it, earned, which was that she had been invisible in this neighborhood for months, and nobody had listened to 11 pages of documented evidence about a building that was going to hurt people. And last night a building had hurt people. And now she was sitting in a library with burned hands trying to figure out who to call next. Her phone unknown number. Phoenix area code. She stared at it for 3 rings. She answered. Emily Carter? The voice was not Kevin from Housing and Residential. It was a woman's voice, measured and brisk, with the clipped efficiency of someone who had a lot of calls to make and no patience for preamble. Yes, my name is Detective Sandra Okafor, Phoenix PD. I'm one of the investigators on the Maricopa Arms fire. I understand you may have been present at the scene last night and that you have some documentation you'd like to share with us. Emily sat up straighter. Yes. How did you? Kevin from Housing and Residential called the tip line approximately 4 minutes ago. He flagged your name. A brief pause. He said you sounded like someone who actually had something. Can you come in this morning? Emily looked at her bandaged hands. She looked at the folders spread across the library table. Yes, she said. Where? Detective Sandra Okafor was a compact black woman in her mid-40s with natural hair, reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and an office that contained so much organized paperwork that it looked less like a space someone worked in and more like a space that was itself working. She met Emily at the front desk of the Arrowhead Precinct building and walked her back through a corridor that smelled like old coffee and newer anxiety. And she did not comment on Emily's backpack or her clothes or the particular category of visible fatigue that Emily understood she carried in her face and posture the way a fluorescent sign carried voltage you. Couldn't see the electricity, but you knew it was there. She sat Emily down across from her desk and she put a glass of water in front of her, and then she sat down herself and she said, tell me what you have. Emily told her. She started with the dumpster, and the maintenance log, and the August electrical report, and she laid the pages out in the order she had organized them, in the order that made the argument clearest. Here is what was known, here is when it was known, here is what should have happened, here is what actually happened, and here is the gap between those two things, measured in months and complaints and voicemails and a fire on the 14th of December. Okafor did not interrupt her. She read each page as it was handed to her, quickly but completely, in the way of a person who knew how to extract information from documents without having to read them twice. She asked 3 clarifying questions. Where exactly had Emily obtained the maintenance log? What was the name of the paralegal at the legal aid clinic? And had Emily spoken to any media contacts about this material? Emily answered all 3 directly. When Emily finished, Okafor set down the last page and looked at her. How long have you had this? The first document since the 2nd week of September. The electrical report since October 14th. October 14th, Okafor repeated. Yes. You've had written evidence of a Category 3 electrical fire risk in that building for 2 months. Yes. And you've been trying to get someone to look at it. Yes. The housing office twice, the legal aid clinic. The city councilman's constituent services line, a reporter at Channel 12 who never responded to my email. Okafor was quiet. Emily watched her. Can I ask you something? Okafor said. Yes. Why didn't you stop? A lot of people would have handed this to the first official person who would take it and considered their obligation discharged. Emily thought about it. She thought about the tenants she had watched go in and out of the Maricopa Arms for months. The older woman on the 2nd floor, who walked with a cane and took the stairs very slowly. The man on the 1st floor who came home at the same time every evening and leaned his forehead against his door for a moment. Before he went inside, the gesture of a person who was glad to be home even if home was not much. The sound of children's voices from 2 different units when the windows were open. Because it was going to happen, Emily said. I knew it was going to happen. And if I stopped trying to warn people, and it happened anyway, I didn't want to be someone who had known and not tried. And Okafor looked at her for a long time. All right, she said. She picked up the folder. I need to make copies of all of this. And I need your formal statement about last night. Both your presence at the scene and the documentation. She paused. I also need you to understand that this investigation may take time, and that having this documentation puts you in the position of a potential witness, and that there are people who would prefer that a witness like you. She chose the next word carefully, not persist. Emily absorbed that. You mean whoever ignored the reports, she said. I mean whoever made decisions about what got reported, what got filed, and what disappeared, Okafor said, which may or may not be the same people who ignored the reports. We don't know yet. She paused again. Where are you staying? Emily looked at her steadily. I'll be at the Encanto Library most days between 9 and 6, she said. And I have a phone. Okafor read her face with the same precise quiet that Emily was beginning to recognize as the detective's native mode. She did not say anything about the answer Emily had not given. She reached into her desk drawer and produced a card, a real one, with a title and a direct number and an email, and she placed it on the desk. My direct line, she said. If anything changes or if anyone approaches you about what you've seen or what you have, you call me. Not the tip line, me day or night. Emily picked up the card. She now had 2 cards in her front pocket. She looked at them together for a moment. J. Hayes and Detective Sandra Okafor, and she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Something she didn't have an immediate name for. Something that sat between hope and its more cautious cousin. The feeling that the ground was perhaps not as absent as it had seemed, that there might be something to stand on after all, if she was careful about where she put her weight. She put both cards back in her pocket. I'll be in touch, Emily said. You will, Okafor agreed. It wasn't a question. She was back at the library by 1 in the afternoon, and Noah Hayes was sitting at the table where she usually sat, eating a sandwich, with Jackson Hayes standing behind him. Stopped in the doorway. Jackson saw her first. He straightened, and he did the thing she was beginning to understand was characteristic of him, the slow, deliberate stillness that was not hesitation but choice, the conscious decision not to move towards someone faster than they were prepared to be approached. Noah looked up from his sandwich. Emily, he said, with the uncomplicated delight of an 8-year-old who had not yet learned to modulate enthusiasm for social reasons, and he half stood from the chair and then remembered where he was and sat back down with the exaggerated care of a child in a library. Emily walked to the table. She stood across from Jackson. She looked at him and then at the table and then at him again. How did you find me, she said. I asked Donna, he said. She turned to look at the front desk. Donna caught her eye and gave her a small, unapologetic shrug, the shrug of a woman who had made a judgment call and stood by it. Emily turned back to Jackson. You didn't have to come, she said. No, he agreed. I didn't have to. She waited. He pulled out the chair across from Noah and sat down. And the movement was so matter-of-fact, so free of performance, that it caught her slightly off guard. He wasn't building to something. He wasn't managing a social situation. He was just sitting down at a table where someone he had something to say to was standing. I want to know if you're okay, he said. I said I was okay last night. I know what you said last night. He held her gaze. People say they're okay. I'm asking if you actually are. Emily sat down, not because she had decided to exactly, but because the question was too honest to answer standing up, and the answer required somewhere to put itself. My hands hurt, she said. I have a police detective who wants me to be a witness in the fire investigation. I have 11 pages of documentation that may or may not be enough to make something happen to the right people. And I slept in a doorway last night. She paused, so no. Not entirely. Jackson nodded. Tell me about the 11 pages, he said. So she did. She told him the whole of it. Beginning to end. The same story she had told Detective Okafor 3 hours ago, but different in tone, because Okafor had needed the professional version, the organized and documented and precisely attributed version, and Jackson Hayes was looking at her with the focused attention of a man who wanted the real version, the one underneath the official one, The one that included the woman in the library who had put proper bandages on her hands, and the 7 months of a building nobody had listened to, and the particular shape of what it felt like to know something bad was going to happen and to watch it happen anyway because nobody with the power to stop it was willing to look at you long enough to hear what you knew. And she told him all of it. Noah ate his sandwich quietly. He was a perceptive kid. She had already understood that from the burning room, the way he had followed her instructions with an intelligence that went beyond obedience, and he tracked the conversation with his eyes without interrupting, which Emily suspected was unusual for him. He was being careful with this, with her. When she finished, Jackson was quiet for a moment. You had proof of a fire hazard, he said. Yes, in writing. Yes, since October the 14th. And nobody would act on it. Nobody with the ability to act on it. Jackson sat back in the chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. She watched the muscles in his jaw move. Something was working through him, not rage. Or not only rage. Something underneath rage. The moral outrage of a man who had a very direct relationship with the question of which people got protected and which people didn't, and who was arriving at an answer about that question that he found unacceptable. He looked back at her. The building manager, he said. The person who signed off on the false completion reports. You have their name? I have two names, Emily said. The building manager and the property management company owner. And I have enough to connect the property management company to the councilman's district office through. She stopped. She had not told Okafor that last part. Not yet. She was still deciding what the right order was to put information into the right hands. Because once information was in the wrong hands or in the right hands in the wrong order, it had a way of disappearing or being turned into something other than what it was. Jackson was looking at her with complete attention. Through what, he said. Emily reached into her backpack and pulled out page 9. She slid it across the table. He read it. He read it again. He set it down. A campaign contribution, he said. $12,000, Emily said. 6 weeks before the electrical report was submitted to the city. The report that subsequently disappeared from the filing system. Jackson picked up the page again. She watched him read it for the third time. The focused line-by-line attention of a man who was making sure he understood exactly what he was looking at. And Emily, he said without looking up, yes, this is bigger than a building fire. And I know, this is going to make people very uncomfortable. And I know. He set down the page. He looked at her. Do you understand, he said, slowly. And what happens to witnesses in cases that make powerful people uncomfortable? And she met his eyes. I've been sleeping outside for 4 months, she said. And I've been invisible for 4 months. You know what nobody does to a person they can't see? And he waited. Nothing, she said. Because you can't target something you don't think exists. Jackson Hayes looked at her for a long time. Then something shifted in his face, that same movement from the night before. The door finding the right key, and this time it went deeper, opened wider, and he sat forward and put both forearms on the table and said, in a voice that was very quiet and very deliberate, that changes now. Noah looked up from his sandwich. Dad, he said. Finish your sandwich, Jackson said. Noah looked at Emily. Emily looked at Noah. Noah picked up his sandwich. I'm not asking for protection. Emily said, her voice careful, precise. I'm not asking for anything. I know you're not asking, Jackson said. Then Emily. He said her name the way her mother used to say it, when she'd finished talking and her mother needed her to listen. Not impatient, simply clear. Last night you walked into a burning building for my son. Nobody asked you to. Nobody was beside you. He paused. You know what that makes you? She said nothing. It makes you someone I owe a debt I can't pay in cash, he said. So I'm not going to insult you by trying. He leaned back. What I am going to do is make some calls. And I am going to make sure that from this point forward, when Emily Carter walks into a room with 11 pages of evidence, people know that there are people who would very much like to know about it if anything happens to those pages, or to the person carrying them. Emily stared at him. You don't know me, she said. I know what you did last night, he said. That's the only introduction I need. Outside the library windows, The afternoon was moving into the long flat light of a Phoenix winter afternoon, and Emily could hear the city going about its business, and she thought about Detective Okafor's office, and the copies of her 11 pages now sitting in a police evidence folder, and she thought about the name J. Hayes on the card in her pocket, and she thought about the words he had just said with the directness of someone who didn't make statements he didn't intend to honor. She thought about what it meant to stop being invisible. She thought about all the ways that could go wrong. And then she thought about a boy named Noah, who had looked at her with trusting eyes in a burning room, and who was sitting across from her right now, eating the last corner of a turkey sandwich, entirely confident that the world had arranged itself correctly by putting Emily Carter at this table. And she picked up page 9. She slid it back into the folder. She put the folder in her backpack. She looked at Jackson Hayes. Okay, she said, one word, 2 letters. But they both understood what she meant. And she wasn't asking for rescue. She was accepting an alliance. And that was a completely different thing. The calls Jackson made that afternoon were not long calls. Emily knew this because she was still at the library table when he made the first 2, stepping just far enough away that she could see him but not clearly hear him, and both conversations lasted under 90 seconds. That was something she filed immediately. A man who could communicate what needed to be communicated in under 90 seconds was a man who had a network that already understood context, that didn't need setup or explanation, that operated on a shared language compressed down to its essential load-bearing words. She had seen that kind of efficiency before. In hospital units, among the staff who had worked together long enough that a look across a room carried a full sentence. In the nursing program, among the professors who had spent decades distilling complex knowledge into the fewest possible words, because in an emergency, words cost time and time cost lives. She had not expected to see it here. But then she was learning that there were a number of things she had not expected about Jackson Hayes. He came back to the table and sat down. He didn't tell her what he'd said or who he'd called, and she didn't ask, because she understood instinctively that this was not evasion, it was respect. He was not going to brief her on a process she hadn't requested, and he was not going to perform transparency as a substitute for actual trustworthiness. What he had done was already done. She would see what it produced. Noah needs to get back, he said. He's staying with my friend Reese for the next couple days while I sort some things out. The apartment, he stopped. A brief controlled pause. And we're not going back to that building? No, Emily agreed. And you shouldn't. He looked at her. Where do you go at night? She looked at him with the level patience of someone who had answered a version of this question before, who knew all the ways it could be asked, and what usually followed each version. And I find somewhere. That's not an answer. It's the honest one. Jackson put both hands flat on the table, not in frustration, in the gesture of a man placing himself firmly in a position he intended to hold. I'm not going to push, he said, but I want you to hear something. She waited. What you're about to walk into, the investigation, the testimony, whatever Okafor and her people decide to do with your 11 pages, that's not a safe process for someone with no fixed address and no one who knows where to look if you stop answering your phone. Emily absorbed this. I've been managing that risk for 4 months, she said. You've been managing it invisibly, he said. That changes when you become a named witness in a fire investigation. Invisible is one kind of protection, being seen is a different kind. But you can't have both at once. He held her gaze. Right now you're about to lose the first kind. I'm trying to make sure you have the second. She thought about that for a long moment. She thought about Okafor's words. People who would prefer that a witness like you not persist. She thought about page 9. And the $12,000. And the name of the councilman whose district office had received that contribution. A name that appeared in 3 other places in her folder, in ways that were not yet fully connected, but that she had been working on connecting. She thought about what it meant that the electrical report had disappeared from the city's filing system, and what it took to make a document disappear from a city filing system, and what kind of reach that required. Okay, she said, for the second time that afternoon. The same 2 letters carrying a different weight this time, a heavier weight. The weight of someone choosing to trust a thing that trust had not previously been rewarded for trusting. Earned. Jackson nodded. He did not say anything else about it. Earned. He turned to Noah. Say goodbye to Emily. Noah slid off the chair and looked at Emily with the serious attention she was coming to recognize as his natural mode. Earned. Are you going to be okay? He asked. She almost smiled. Earned. The echo of the sidewalk outside the Maricopa Arms, the same question in the same small voice, and her same answer rising up automatically before she had time to filter it. Earned. I'm okay, she said. I asked the same thing last night, he said. And you said the same thing. Earned. But your hands were burned. Emily looked at him. She felt something move in her chest that she didn't entirely have control over. Earned. I'll be more okay than last night, she said. How's that? Earned. Noah considered this with genuine seriousness, the way children consider answers when they haven't yet learned to accept placeholders. Earned. Then he nodded. Okay, he said. And he picked up the paper bag his sandwich had come in, folded it neatly in thirds the way someone had taught him, and placed it in the trash can by the table before following his father to the door. Earned. Emily watched them leave. She sat at the table for a long time after that, in the particular silence that follows a thing you can't quite name, but that has already changed something in you. Earned. Then she opened the folder and turned to page 10, the one she hadn't shown Jackson, and she read it again. Earned. Page 10 was different from the others. It wasn't a document she'd obtained from a dumpster or through Marcus at the legal aid clinic or from a public records request. Earned. It was a photograph she'd taken on her crack screen phone in October, of a notice posted in the Maricopa Arms lobby, a routine-looking fire inspection notice, the kind that appeared on a laminated card in every occupied building in Phoenix, with a certification date and an inspector's signature. She had photographed it because something about it had bothered her in a way she couldn't immediately articulate, and she had learned to trust the things that bothered her before she could articulate them. It had taken her 2 weeks of library computer time to figure out what it was. The inspector's signature on the notice was illegible, as most were, but the certification number was visible. And when she ran that certification number through the state licensing board's public database, it returned a name. The name was not an active fire inspector. The name belonged to a license that had been suspended in 2021 for falsifying inspection records on a commercial property in Scottsdale. Someone had used a suspended fraudulent inspector's credentials to certify the Maricopa Arms as fire safe. In October, 6 weeks after the electrical assessment had flagged the building as a Category 3 fire risk. She had not shown this page to Okafor, not because she was withholding it, she intended to provide it, but because she needed to understand what she was holding before she handed it to someone else. Because once you put information in other people's hands, you lost control of the order and the framing, and the order and the framing of this particular piece of information mattered enormously. Because page 10 didn't just connect the building manager to negligence. It connected someone with access to the city's licensing system, someone who knew which credentials were suspended and could be used without triggering an automatic flag to what looked, unmistakably, like deliberate fraud. And deliberate fraud was not a building manager's play. Deliberate fraud required someone who understood the system well enough to work inside it. Someone with institutional knowledge. Someone who knew where the gaps were. She turned page 10 over in her hands. She thought about the $12,000 on page 9. She thought about the word Okafor had used, persist. She put page 10 back in the folder. She was going to need to talk to Okafor again. Soon. Today if possible. She reached for her phone. It rang before she could unlock it. Unknown number. Not the Phoenix area code she'd gotten the call from this morning. A different 1602, which was still Phoenix, but a different exchange, a different part of the city. She answered. Silence for 2 seconds. Then a man's voice, low, very controlled, with the careful enunciation of someone choosing each word before releasing it. Miss Carter. Yes. My name isn't important. What is important is that you have some documents that belong to us, and we'd very much like them returned. The library was quiet around her. Donna was at the front desk 15 feet away. 2 other patrons at other tables. The afternoon light was flat and ordinary, and the world was going about its business, and a man was on the phone telling her that her documents belonged to him. And I don't think that's accurate, Emily said. And her voice came out steadier than she felt, which was something she noted with a distant and professional appreciation. And the way she had noted in nursing clinicals that her hands stayed steady even when her heart rate wasn't. And the records from the Maricopa Arms Management Office, the man said, and specifically the maintenance logs and the contractor assessments. And those records are proprietary business documents. And documents I found in a dumpster are generally considered abandoned property, Emily said. But you're welcome to speak with the Phoenix Police Department about it. And I gave copies to a detective Okafor this morning. The silence that followed was different from the silence before, more textured. The silence of recalculation. You made a mistake, the man said. Still controlled, but something had changed in the temperature of the voice. Something that was not quite a threat and was not quite not one. I made a record, Emily said. There's a difference. She hung up, her hands were shaking again. She sat very still and breathed through it and looked at Donna at the front desk. The ordinary reassuring fact of Donna in a green cardigan sorting, returned books, and she let the ordinariness of it do its work. Then she called Okafor's direct number. Okafor picked up on the second ring, and Emily told her about the call, verbatim as precisely as she could reconstruct it. Okafor asked 3 questions. Had she recognized the voice? Was the number still on her screen? Had she told anyone else about the documents in the last 24 hours besides Okafor herself? And Emily answered all 3. Then she told Okafor about page 10. There was a pause on the line that was different from the pauses Okafor usually used. Longer. Can you come back in? Okafor said. Today now. Emily looked at the clock on her phone, and it was 3:47 in the afternoon. Yes, she said. She was reaching for her backpack when her phone buzzed with a text from a number she now recognized. Jackson Hayes, it said. My guys will be outside the library in 10 minutes. Don't walk alone today. She stared at the text. She had not told Jackson about the phone call. She had not told him she was going back to the precinct. She typed back, how did you know? The reply came in under 30 seconds because I made calls and people talk and you had that folder and someone was always going to notice. 10 minutes. Emily put her phone in her pocket and stood up and went to the front desk. Donna, she said, I have to go. If anyone comes in asking for me. Nobody came in asking for you, Donna said, without looking up from the books she was sorting. I haven't seen you since this morning. Emily looked at her. Donna looked up. Her eyes were steady and clear and completely serious. Be careful, she said. Come back when you can. Emily nodded. She went outside. There were 2 motorcycles at the curb. 2 men she hadn't met before, both in leather vests with the Hells Angels patch, both sitting with the particular relaxed alertness of people who were very comfortable being exactly where they were and were also paying attention to everything. One of them broad, maybe 50, with a beard going gray at the edges, looked at her and gave her a nod that was not casual. That meant something specific. That meant, we know who you are and why we're here. I'm going to the police precinct on Arrowhead, Emily said. We know, he said. Jackson said, I don't need. You need to get there safe, he said. That's all this is. She looked at him for a moment. Then she got on the back of the nearest motorcycle because it was 3:47 and Okafor was waiting, and some arguments were not worth having when the underlying offer was reasonable. The man with the graying beard didn't say anything else for the entire ride. He didn't need to. Okafor had a second person in the room. When Emily arrived, a man she introduced as Agent Reyes from the State Attorney General's Financial Crimes Unit, young, sharp-eyed, with the pen behind the ear energy of someone who had been waiting for a case to arrive that matched the size of what he had available to bring to it. Emily put page 10 on the table. She watched them read it. She watched the moment Okafor understood what she was looking at, and then the moment Reyes understood, and the brief wordless exchange between them that confirmed they were seeing the same thing. The certification number, Reyes said. You ran it yourself? On the state licensing board's public database.
Yes.
When? The second week of November. He looked at her over the page. You've been sitting on this since November. I've been trying to determine the significance of it since November, Emily said. There's a difference between having a document and understanding what it means in context. And what does it mean in context? Okafor said. Emily laid it out. All of it, the way she had organized it in the library over weeks. The way it built from the maintenance logs to the electrical report, to the campaign contribution, to the fraudulent inspection certification. She laid it out in the precise, evidence-based, causally linked way she had been trained to present clinical information. Here is what I observed, here is what the data shows, here is the logical connection between them, here is the conclusion the evidence supports. When she finished, neither detective spoke for a moment. Then Reyes said very quietly, "Do you understand what you've built here?" A timeline, Emily said, a connected timeline of decisions that resulted in a building being certified as safe when it was not safe, by someone using fraudulent credentials, 6 weeks after a contractor identified it as a fire risk in writing. That's one way to describe it, Reyes said. Another way is a prosecutable pattern of fraud, concealment, and criminal negligence resulting in a structure fire and potential endangerment of residents. I know, Emily said. That's why I brought it. You said someone called you today, Okafor said, after I left your office this morning. Approximately 2 hours after. Someone who knew you'd been here. Someone who knew I had the documents. They asked for them back. Called them proprietary business records. Okafor and Reyes looked at each other. That call tells us something, Reyes said. It tells us they have someone in or near this building, Okafor said. She did not specify which building. She didn't need to. The room was quiet. Emily felt it, the particular gravitational weight of a moment when something that's been moving slowly for a long time suddenly accelerates. When the pieces that have been arranging themselves in the background click into place fast enough that you can feel the structure of it forming. I need to ask you something, Okafor said, and her voice had changed, not harder, but more direct, the voice of someone moving from intake to action. And I need an honest answer. All right. Is there anyone outside this building who knows the full content of what you have? Anyone you've shared this with? And Emily thought about the library table and Jackson Hayes reading page 9. I showed someone page 9 this afternoon, she said. The campaign contribution, not page 10. Who? Jackson Hayes. Okafor was quiet for 3 seconds. Then the boy's father. Yes. Another silence. Reyes had his pen out and was writing something. Okay, Okafor said. Here's where we are. What you've given us is significant enough that we're going to need to move on it carefully and quickly. Because carefully and quickly are usually in conflict. But in this case, the phone call you received this morning tells us we don't have the luxury of just careful. She folded her hands on the table. I want you somewhere safe tonight. Somewhere we know about. I'm not going to a shelter, Emily said. Shelters have intake systems and intake systems have. I'm not suggesting a shelter, Okafor said. I'm asking if there's somewhere private you can be tonight. Someone you trust. Emily thought about the text from Jackson Hayes. She thought about the 2 men on motorcycles outside. She thought about what Jackson had said in the library. Invisible is one kind of protection. Being seen is a different kind. Yes, she said. Good, Okafor said. Then do that, and Emily. She waited until Emily looked at her directly. Don't talk to anyone else about the contents of that folder. Not until we've had a chance to move on this. Anyone who calls, anyone who approaches you, you tell me first. Understood. She left the precinct at 5:15. The 2 men on the motorcycles were still there. The one with the graying beard looked at her and said, Jackson wants to know where you're staying tonight. She thought about saying she'd figure it out, which had been her answer to that question every night for 4 months. The answer that was true, and that was also, she was beginning to understand. A way of insisting on a self-sufficiency that had become, somewhere along the way, a form of isolation she was no longer sure was serving her. I don't know yet, she said. He pulled out his phone and made a call that lasted 45 seconds. He hung up and looked at her. You do now, he said. Follow us. Jackson's friend Reese turned out to be a woman, Reese Navarro, mid-40s, with cropped dark hair and the direct, uncluttered manner of someone who had arranged her life specifically to leave no room for nonsense, and she ran a house in the Sunny Slope neighborhood that was clean and loud and contained at any given moment between the hours of 4 and 9 p.m. And somewhere between 4 and 7 additional human beings who were in some state of transition and who Reese fed with the matter-of-fact abundance of someone who had decided at some point that her table was going to be large enough for whoever showed up. And Noah was there, doing homework at the kitchen table when Emily arrived. He looked up and grinned with the uncomplicated delight he'd shown at the library, and this time he didn't modulate it for social reasons, and she felt it hit her somewhere undefended. The way his trust kept finding the places in her that she hadn't known were still open. Reese put her in a room at the end of the hall, small and clean, with a window facing the backyard. "Bathroom's next door," Reese said. "There's a spare toothbrush under the sink. Dinner's at 7. You don't have to talk to anyone if you don't want to." She paused at the door. "Jackson told me what you did and what you're dealing with." Emily sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her. "I don't want anyone to make a thing of it," Emily said. "Nobody's making a thing of it," Reese said. "We're just making room." She closed the door. Emily sat in the small room in the fading afternoon and held her backpack in her lap with both bandaged hands and felt the strange, disorienting weight of being somewhere safe, somewhere with a door that closed, somewhere that smelled like cooking food and had a window with a view and a bathroom, with a spare toothbrush, the ordinary, monumental abundance of things she had once taken entirely for granted, and that had revealed themselves through absence to be extraordinary. She opened the backpack. She checked the folder, all 11 pages with page 10 on top. She was still looking at it when her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize, not the one from this afternoon, a different unknown number with a 602 area code. It said, "You should have taken the deal. Last chance." She stared at it. Her thumb moved to Okafor's contact before the thought was fully formed. She forwarded the text with a single line, "Second contact." Different number. Same message pattern. Okafor replied in under a minute, "Screenshot and keep the phone on tonight." "Don't respond. We're tracing both numbers." Emily set the phone down on the bed beside her. She looked at the folder. She thought about the building manager's name on page 3 and the property management company owner's name on page 5 and the inspector's fraudulent credentials on page 10 and the $12,000 on page 9 and the name she had not yet put in front of anyone, the name that connected all the other names in the way a keystone connects an arch, that she had written in pencil on the inside cover of the folder itself, not on any of the 11 pages, in her own handwriting, because there were some things you did not commit to a document until you were certain of the ground you were standing on. She had been certain since the second week of November. She had been waiting for the right moment. She thought, the right moment is when you have enough people around you that the information survives even if you don't. She picked up her phone again. She called Jackson. He answered on the first ring. "I got a second message," she said. Different number, same warning. "I know. Okafor called me." She absorbed this. Okafor had called Jackson. The detective and the biker, moving information between them, with a speed and directness that told her the alliance she had half-consciously stumbled into in a library that afternoon was more organized than she'd realized. "I need to show you something," Emily said, "not on the phone." A pause. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "Tonight," she said, "it's important." The pause was shorter this time. "I'll be there in 20 minutes," he said. He was there in 15. They sat at Reese's kitchen table after dinner, with Noah asleep down the hall and Reese visible in the next room, making pointed decisions to be elsewhere, and Emily opened the folder and turned to the inside cover. She put it in front of Jackson. He read the name she had written there. He looked at her. "You're sure?" he said. "I've been sure for 6 weeks. And you've been carrying this alone for 6 weeks. I didn't have anyone to carry it with." Something moved across his face. Not pity. She would have responded poorly to pity, and some part of her registered with distant gratitude that he understood this. What moved across his face was something more like the expression of a man who had just been shown a weight that another person had been carrying without complaint and was doing the quiet arithmetic of what that had cost them. Earned. This name, he said, changes what this is. Yes. Earned. This isn't just negligent property management and campaign contributions. Earned. This is organized, she said. Yes. He set the folder down. Earned. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, the same gesture he'd made in the library, the upward look of a man letting something settle through him before he responded to it. Earned. Okay, he said. He lowered his gaze and looked at her directly, and his voice was very steady. Earned. You need to know something. What I said earlier about making calls that's already in motion. Earned. By tomorrow morning, there are going to be people in this city who know that Emily Carter exists, that she has documentation of something significant, and that she is not alone. He paused. Earned. What you just showed me makes that more important, not less. Earned. Emily nodded. And the other thing you need to know, he said, is that I've been doing this long enough to understand the difference between someone who has information and someone who has evidence. Earned. You don't just have information. He tapped the folder. Earned. You have evidence, real evidence. The kind that holds up. Earned. The kind that doesn't go away when someone asks nicely. Earned. I know, she said. I know you know. He said, I'm saying it so you hear it from outside yourself. Earned. Because you've been the only one who knew how important this was for a long time. And that kind of loneliness has a way of making you doubt what you actually have. Earned. Emily looked at him. She thought about the 7 months. Earned. The voicemails, the waiting lists, the phone call this afternoon, asking for documents back with the polished confidence of someone who expected compliance. Earned. The text message that had called it a last chance. Earned. She thought about the paralegal Marcus, who had called his help professional courtesy because there was no official mechanism for helping her. Earned. She thought about Donna, who had sorted books and said she hadn't seen Emily since morning. Earned. She thought about Noah, who had folded his sandwich bag into thirds before throwing it away in a library trash can. Earned. She thought about a building she had watched for months. Earned. And a fire she had not been able to prevent. Earned. And a boy she had carried out of it. Earned. And all the ways one thing leads to another in ways that cannot be planned. Earned. She closed the folder. Tomorrow, she said, I'm giving Okafor page 10 and the name. Jackson nodded. I'll go with you, he said. You don't have to. Earned. Emily. She stopped. And he looked at her with the clear, earned, uncomplicated directness that she was coming to understand was not a tactic and not a performance. Earned. That was simply the way he was a man who had decided, earned, at some point that was not tonight, but that tonight had reaffirmed that some things were worth being direct about. Earned. Let me go with you, he said. She looked at her bandaged hands. Earned. She looked at the folder. Earned. She looked at Jackson Hayes, earned, who had arrived at a fire looking for a trained rescuer and found a homeless girl instead, earned, and had somehow without explanation, earned, without ceremony, earned, without making a thing of it, decided that what he had found was exactly enough, earned. Okay, she said, the third time she had said that word today, earned. Each time it had cost her something, each time she had meant it more, earned. Outside Reese Navarro's house in Sunny Slope, earned, the Phoenix Night was doing what Phoenix Nights did, cooling faster than anyone expected, earned, clearing to a sky that was startlingly full of stars for a city of this size, earned, settling into the particular desert quiet that came after the city's noise, stopped pretending it could compete with the dark, earned. Emily did not know what was coming tomorrow. She did not know whose phones were being traced or what the names in her folder were going to mean when they were in front of a judge, earned. She did not know what the men who had called her twice expected to happen when she didn't comply, or how far their reach actually extended, earned, or whether the organized and careful thing she had built over 4 months of invisible watching was going to be enough, earned. She did not know any of it. And what she knew was this, earned, she was in a room with a closed door, earned, and 11 pages of evidence that told a true story, earned, and 2 phone numbers that meant she was not carrying it alone anymore, earned, and somewhere down the hall a boy named Noah was asleep and unhurt. She put the folder in the backpack. She put the backpack beside the bed, earned. She lay down, earned, fully clothed, earned, with her burned hands carefully placed at her sides, earned, and she listened to the house settle around her, earned, the sounds of other people breathing and existing in adjacent rooms, earned, the profound, earned, ordinary comfort of not being the only person in a space, earned. She had not slept in a bed in 4 months. She was asleep inside of 3 minutes. And at 6:17 the next morning, before the alarm she had set on her cracked screen phone had a chance to go off, the house shook with the sound of motorcycles. And not one or two, many. She was at the window before she was fully awake. And the street outside Reese's house in Sunny Slope was filling with motorcycles the way a river fills after rain steadily, from multiple directions at once, with the inexorable logic of water finding its level. And she counted. She stopped counting at 30. She stood at the window with her hand pressed flat against the glass. And not from fear, there was something in the sound and the sight of it that bypassed fear and went directly to something older and more complicated. And she heard Reese's voice from the hall, calm and unsurprised, saying to someone, "Yeah, they're here." Noah appeared in the doorway of Emily's room. He looked at her. He looked out the window at the street filling with motorcycles. He looked back at her. "My dad called his brothers," he said, with the simple certainty of a child explaining something that required no further elaboration. Emily looked at him. She looked at the street. 30-plus motorcycles on a residential street in Phoenix at 6 in the morning, with more still arriving, leather vests, and the particular organized energy of people who had been told where to be and why and had come without requiring further explanation. For Emily Carter, who had been invisible for 4 months, who had been a girl nobody saw, who had carried 11 pages of evidence through a city that couldn't locate her with both hands and a direct address. The world had just decided to see her all at once, with engines. Jackson was already outside when Emily came through Reese's front door. He was standing at the edge of the porch steps with his arms crossed and his eyes moving across the street with the quiet inventory of a man who had called something into motion and was now accounting for everything that had responded. The motorcycles had stopped arriving, but the engines were still settling, ticking down from heat, and the street had the charged, contained energy of a held breath 30-some men and a handful of women in leather vests, some standing beside their bikes, some sitting, all of them oriented toward the house with the particular focused patience of people who had been told what they were here for and were waiting for it to begin. Emily stood on the porch and looked at all of it. She had the backpack over one shoulder and the folder inside it, and both hands still bandaged, and her hair pulled back in the practical way she wore it every day. And she felt, standing there, the profound strangeness of being looked at by 30 people who had driven here in the dark of a Phoenix morning specifically because of her, not through her, not past her, at her. Jackson turned when he heard the door. "You sleep? 3 hours. Better than nothing." Marginally, she looked at the street. "How many people did you call?" "I called 4, he said. "They called the rest." She processed that, a network that multiplied itself. 4 calls that became 30 motorcycles by 6 in the morning, in the way that things spread through communities built on loyalty, rather than hierarchy, not because someone ordered it, but because the word went out and the word was enough. "They don't know me," she said. "They know what you did," Jackson said. "And they know what's being done to you. That's enough." She stood with that for a moment. A man separated from the group on the street and came up the porch steps, the one with the graying beard from the day before, who had ridden her to the precinct without asking questions. Up close in the morning light, she could see that he was older than she'd initially placed him, closer to 60, with the particular weathered quality of someone who had spent a lot of years making deliberate choices about what he let matter. "This is Dex," Jackson said. "He's been with us since before I was. He's the one who made the other calls." Dex looked at her with eyes that were direct without being aggressive, assessing without being unkind. "Jackson told us about the building," he said. "About what you had and what you couldn't get anyone to do with it." He paused. "My sister lost a kid in a house fire in 1994. Faulty wiring the landlord had been notified about twice. He said it without inflection, the way people state facts that have been lived with long enough to be carried without ceremony. So Emily looked at him. "To you," she said. He nodded once and went back down the steps. Jackson watched him go and then looked at Emily. "We're going to the precinct with you," he said. "Not inside." And outside. But we're going to be there. That might complicate things for Okafor. And I spoke to Okafor this morning at 5:30, he said. And Emily stared at him. You called a police detective at 5:30 in the morning. And she answered, he said, as if this were the relevant point. And she said what happens outside the building is not her jurisdiction, and she has no opinion about it. And that's a very careful thing for her to say. She's a very careful person, Jackson said. And it's why I think she's going to do this right. Emily shifted the backpack on her shoulder. And she thought about page 10 and the name written in pencil on the inside cover and the conversation she was going to have inside that precinct building in approximately 2 hours. And the conversation that was going to put the full weight of what she had assembled in front of people with the legal authority to act on it. And she thought about the phone calls, the two men who had told her she'd made a mistake and called it a last chance. And she thought about what it meant that they had called her instead of coming to find her. And they didn't know where she was. They had her phone number, and they had the general fact of her existence, and they knew she had the documents, but they didn't have an address. And because she had never had an address. And because she had been invisible, and invisible meant untraceable in ways that now, and suddenly, and were working in her favor. And they don't know I'm here. And she said aloud, and not to Jackson specifically, and more to herself, and organizing the thought as she spoke it. And no, he agreed. And by the time anyone figures out where you spent the night, you'll already be at the precinct and it won't matter. She nodded. Let's go, she said. And Okafor met them at the front entrance of the precinct at 8:15, which was earlier than they had agreed. And she had Agent Reyes with her, and a third person, a woman in a gray blazer, who introduced herself as Assistant District Attorney Patricia Moss, which was a title that made the morning feel suddenly significantly more serious than it had already been. Emily shook Patricia Moss's hand with her bandaged right hand and watched the ADA register the bandages and file them without comment. The practiced neutrality of someone who had learned not to let reaction cross her face before she had full context. They went into a conference room. Emily put the folder on the table. She took out all 11 pages. She put the folder itself on the table open to the inside cover with the name in pencil facing up. Moss looked at the name. She looked at Reyes. She looked at Okafor. None of them spoke for a full 4 seconds, which in a room full of law enforcement professionals was a long time. Walk us through it, Moss said. Emily walked them through it. She had done it twice now for Okafor alone. And for Okafor and Reyes together, and each time she had done it, the shape of the argument had become cleaner, the transitions between pieces of evidence more precise, and the causal logic more airtight. It was the same skill she had practiced in nursing school presenting case studies, the ability to organize complex information into a sequence that built inevitably toward a conclusion, so that by the time you stated the conclusion, it felt less like an assertion and more like something the evidence had arrived at on its own. She started with the maintenance logs from the dumpster. She ended with the name on the inside cover. When she finished, Moss had filled 2 pages of a legal pad with notes. And Reyes had his laptop open and was running something Emily couldn't see. And Okafor was looking at page 10 with an expression that was very still in the way that moving water is still just before it accelerates through a narrowing. The fraudulent inspection, Moss said. You traced the certification number yourself. On the state licensing board's public database.
Yes.
It took me approximately 20 minutes. 20 minutes, Moss repeated. She put her pen down. Someone used a suspended inspector's credentials to certify a building as fire safe, and it was discoverable in 20 minutes on a public database. Yes, which means either whoever did it was not particularly concerned about being caught, or they were confident that nobody with the resources to check would have a reason to look, Emily said. Which is the same as not being concerned about being caught if the person you're talking about has never had to worry about accountability before. Moss looked at her with an expression that shifted slightly from the professional neutral she'd arrived with into something more like the expression of a person who was revising an estimate upward. You said you were studying nursing, Moss said. 2 semesters from completion. And you put this together. Moss gestured at the 11 pages over 4 months, while living without stable housing, using library computers and public databases and a phone with a cracked screen. And some help from a paralegal named Marcus at the Garfield Legal Aid Clinic, Emily said. And he should be acknowledged. Moss looked at her for another moment. And then she picked up the folder and looked at the name on the inside cover again. Councilman Dennis Warwick, she said. Yes. You understand that naming a sitting city councilman in a fraud and criminal negligence investigation is significant. Emily held her gaze. It's also accurate. The room was quiet. Reyes looked up from his laptop. The contribution on page 9, I just pulled the campaign finance filing. It's there. $12,000. October 3rd. From a subsidiary of Meridian Property Holdings. Which is the parent company of the management company that runs the Maricopa Arms. Warwick's largest contributor in the last cycle, Okafor said. Third largest, Reyes corrected. Meridian Property Holdings appears in 3 separate files across 3 entities. Total contribution in the last election cycle. He paused, reading. $41,000. The number landed in the room. Emily had not known the full number. She had found the 12,000. She had suspected there was more. But 41,000 was a different order of magnitude. It wasn't a favor. It was a relationship, ongoing and substantial, and structured across multiple entities in exactly the way relationships are structured, when both parties understand that what they are doing should not appear to be what it is. That's not in the folder, Moss said to Emily. No. I only found the 12. We found the rest in the last 4 minutes. Moss tapped the legal pad. Which means your 12,000 is the thread we pulled to get to 41, which is the thread that gets us to a pattern. She paused. You understand what a pattern does in a criminal case. It moves it from coincidence to intent, Emily said. Moss looked at her with the same upward revised expression. Yes, she said, it does exactly that. The formal statement took 2 hours. Emily sat across from a court reporter and an investigator she hadn't met before, a quiet man named Tran, who asked questions with the methodical precision of someone laying foundations, and she answered every question with the same careful, evidence-based specificity she had brought to the conference room, not editorializing, not interpreting beyond what the document supported, giving the investigator exactly what was there and not one syllable more. It was the most exhausting 2 hours she could remember. Not because the questions were difficult, because the precision required was absolute, and absolute precision at the level of testimony, with a court reporter's fingers moving on keys, and the knowledge that what she said in this room would exist in a form that could be read back in a courtroom, required a quality of attention that used everything she had. When it was over, Tran left the room and Okafor came back in. She put a bottle of water and a wrapped sandwich on the table. Eat, Okafor said. Emily ate. Okafor sat across from her and waited until she had finished most of the sandwich before she said what she had come to say. Warwick's office called us this morning, she said. At 7:45, 45 minutes before you arrived. Emily put down the sandwich. They identified themselves as the councilman's chief of staff and asked whether there was an active investigation into the Maricopa Arms fire and whether it involved the management company. Okafor's voice was level. Our department's standard response is that we don't confirm or deny active investigations. That's what they were told. They knew, Emily said. Before I even got here, they knew something was in motion. They didn't know what. They were trying to find out. The phone calls, Emily said. They traced the phone calls back to me, and then they traced me back to... She stopped. How? I gave housing and residential a phone number, not an address. The calls came to a mobile number. How did they know to call the councilman's office? Okafor looked at her for a moment. That is the right question, she said. And the answer is that we don't know yet. But the fact that they knew to call us before your statement was on record tells us the connection between someone in this building and someone in Warwick's operation is active and current. Someone in this building, Emily repeated. Someone with access to information about incoming tips and witnesses. Okafor let that land. We are managing it. But you need to understand that this is moving faster than standard investigations move, because the people on the other side of it are moving fast, and they are not unsophisticated. And Emily sat with that. She thought about the $41,000 spread across 3 entities, and the disappeared inspection report, the suspended inspector's credentials used without apparent concern about being checked, and the confidence of the phone calls, not aggressive, not threatening in the explicit way of people who were scared, but controlled, certain, the confidence of people who believed they operated in a system tilted enough in their direction that the tilt itself was a weapon. They're not used to being checked, she said. That's why they weren't careful. They've done versions of this before and nobody looked close enough. That's our read too, Okafor said, which means there may be more properties, more filings, more complaints that went nowhere. There are, Emily said. Okafor looked at her sharply. I found 2 other properties managed by Meridian subsidiaries in Phoenix, Emily said. I didn't include them in the folder because I only had partial documentation, and I didn't want to overreach the evidence I could actually support. She paused. But I have the addresses. Okafor looked at her for a long moment. Emily, she said, and there was something in her voice that was not quite professional neutral anymore. Something that had edges to it. Something real. When we're done with this, and you go back to school, what are you studying to be? A nurse. Then God help the hospital that gets you, Okafor said, because you are going to be the most thorough person they have ever encountered, and it is going to terrify everyone. Emily felt something warm move through her that she didn't try to name. The 2 addresses, she said. Should I write them down, Okafor said, and pushed a notepad across the table. She came out of the precinct at 11:47 in the morning into thin winter sunlight and the sound of engines. 32 motorcycles, she counted this time, arranged along the street outside the precinct with the same patient, charged stillness as before, and the people who passed on the sidewalk registered them with the particular sideways awareness that large groups of Hell's Angels tended to produce not fear, exactly, something more like the instinctive recalibration of someone who has just understood that the social geometry of a space has changed and is adjusting their behavior accordingly. Jackson was at the foot of the steps. He looked at her face, and he read it the way he had been reading her face since a sidewalk outside a burning building, with the quick, unadorned attention of someone who has decided that what is actually there matters more than what is expected. Moss is taking it, she said. He exhaled. Not dramatically. Just the breath of someone releasing something they had been holding. Warwick, they're building the case. The contribution trail is deeper than I found. They're pulling the other filings now. She paused. They think there are more properties. There are more properties, Jackson said. Dex has been making calls all morning. 2 other buildings in the district, both with unresolved safety complaints, both managed by Meridian subsidiaries. She stared at him. You found them this morning. Dex knows people who live in them, he said it simply. The lived knowledge of a community that exists outside official databases, that carried its own information in its own networks, that knew things about the neighborhood that no city filing system had ever recorded. We've been sending their complaints to Okafor since 9. Emily looked at the 32 motorcycles and the men and women beside them, and she thought about all of it, the folder months and the voicemails and the precinct boss's legal pad and the $41,000 in Okafor's voice saying, what are you studying to be? And she felt the accumulated weight of it shift, not disappear, not resolve, but shift. The way a thing you have been carrying alone shifts when someone else puts their hands on it, not taking it from you but redistributing the load so that the weight is the same but the carrying is different. She thought about page 10 and the name in pencil and the 2 hours of testimony. She thought about the councilman's chief of staff calling at 7:45. She thought about the woman on the 2nd floor of the Maricopa Arms who walked with a cane and took the stairs slowly. The man who pressed his forehead to his door before going inside. The sound of children's voices from 2 units. She thought about a boy named Noah who had put his arms around her neck in a burning room. She felt suddenly and without warning earned. The full weight of 4 months arrive at once, not grief, earned, not breakdown, earned, but the particular exhaustion of someone who has been braced against something for so long that when the bracing is no longer required, earned, the body doesn't immediately know how to be unbraced, earned, and so it registers the change as a kind of falling, earned, controlled but real, earned, the physical fact of a person arriving at the other side of something enormous. Her eyes filled. She did not let them spill. She breathed through it, earned. Jackson watched her do this, and he did not say anything, and he did not look away. And she was grateful for both those things with a gratitude that was too large for the moment to contain. Earned. Dex came up beside Jackson. He looked at Emily. "They'll listen now," he said. Earned. She looked at him. "The people who wouldn't listen before," he said. "And they'll listen now. Not because you changed, because they can see you." Earned. She thought about what Jackson had said in the library. Earned. Invisible is one kind of protection, being seen is a different kind. Earned. She had lost the first. She was still deciding what to do with the second. Earned. "What happens to the people in the other buildings?" she said. Earned. "The ones with unresolved complaints." "Okafor's people are going out there today," Jackson said. Earned. "Inspections, real ones. And the tenants? If the buildings are found to be unsafe, they'll need to relocate. Earned. They'll need housing assistance. They'll need Emily." Jackson's voice was gentle. Earned. She stopped. "One thing at a time," he said. She looked at him. "I know," she said. "I know. She stopped again. Earned. "I've been thinking 5 steps ahead for 4 months, because if I stopped thinking 5 steps ahead, the thing I was 5 steps ahead of would catch up to me." Earned. "I know," he said. "But right now the thing you were 5 steps ahead of is in a conference room with an assistant district attorney, and it's not catching up to anyone." He held her gaze. Earned. "You can think 1 step ahead for a minute." She considered that. Earned. 1 step ahead. And 1 step was, earned. She had nowhere to live, earned. Burned hands, earned. A cracked phone, $13 in her backpack, earned. And the most important decision she had ever made in her life, in the right hands of the right people at the right time, earned. 1 step was, she was standing outside a police precinct in Phoenix on a cold December morning with 32 motorcycles behind her and a man who had found her at a library and trusted her because she had walked into a fire. Earned. 1 step was, she was still here. She had kept walking every night for 4 months because keeping walking was the only form of faith available. Earned. And the walking had led her here, earned. To this step, earned. To this morning, earned. To the particular and impossible convergence of all the things she had done when no one was watching suddenly mattering in a room full of people who were very much paying attention. And she reached into her front pocket. She took out the card J. And Hayes, and she looked at it. Then she looked at Jackson. And "I need to call my mother," she said. Something moved across his face. And the same movement as before. And the door finding the right key, but deeper this time, wider. And he didn't try to manage it or cover it with words. Earned. "Reese has a landline," he said. "Use it as long as you need." Earned. Emily nodded. She started down the steps. Earned. She was halfway down when a shout went up from the street, not alarmed, earned, not angry, earned, the particular sound of a group that has spotted something, and she looked up to see a news van pulling to the curb across the street, earned, and a second one behind it, and a reporter she vaguely recognized from Channel 12 getting out with a camera crew. And Emily stopped. She felt Jackson come up beside her. And "You don't have to talk to them," he said. "I know." Earned. "You don't have to do anything today that you don't choose to do." Earned. She looked at the reporter getting her mic ready. Earned. Looking at the motorcycles. Earned. Looking at the precinct. Earned. Putting the visual story together with the rapid professional assessment of someone who understood that the picture in front of her was a picture worth stopping for. Earned. Emily thought about the email she had sent to Channel 12 in October. Earned. The one that had never been answered. Earned. She thought about 11 pages in a folder and 4 months of voicemails and a councilman's chief of staff calling a police precinct at 7:45 in the morning because the machinery of accountability had finally engaged. Earned. And the people it was turning toward could feel it. Earned. She thought about what it meant to be visible. She thought about all the people in all the buildings who were still invisible. Earned. She looked at the reporter. She started walking toward her. Earned. Jackson said, earned. Behind her quietly, Emily. Earned. She glanced back. He gave her a single nod. Not go ahead. Not be careful. Something more specific than either the nod of a person who has watched someone make a decision and recognizes it as exactly the right one. She turned back and kept walking. The reporter saw her coming and said something to her camera operator, and they oriented toward her, and Emily Carter, 20 years old, with burned hands and a backpack and no fixed address, walked across a Phoenix street at 11:53 in the morning toward a camera that was about to show her face to the city that had not been able to see her for 4 months. Miss Carter? The reporter said. She was younger up close, maybe 30, with the careful professional neutrality of someone who had been trained not to show excitement at a story's arrival. I'm Sarah Flores, Channel 12. Are you the woman who went into the Maricopa Arms fire? Yes, Emily said. Can I ask you a few questions? Emily looked at the camera. She thought about the email in October. She thought about Donna in the green cardigan. She thought about Marcus at the legal aid clinic and Detective Okafor and Patricia Moss and her mother in Tucson and Noah folding a paper bag into thirds and a man pressing his forehead to his apartment door. She thought about who this story was actually about. I'll answer your questions, she said, but I want to tell you something first. She looked directly at the camera lens, not at the reporter, at the camera, at whatever was behind it, the city watching. There are people in this neighborhood who have been trying to be heard for a long time. The fire didn't start on December 14th. It started a lot earlier than that. And what happened to the Maricopa Arms is happening in other buildings right now. I want to talk about that. Sarah Flores looked at her. Okay, the reporter said, tell me. And Emily did. She stood in front of a camera on a cold Phoenix street with 32 motorcycles behind her and a backpack containing everything she owned and both hands wrapped in bandages. And she told the truth about the building and the documents and the complaints and the months of silence and the electrical report and the certification and all the pieces of a story that had been happening in plain sight while the city walked past it. She did not use the councilman's name. That was for the legal process. That belonged to Okafor and Moss and the machinery of accountability that was now finally in motion. But she told everything else. She told it clearly and directly and with the precision of someone who had spent 4 months making sure she understood exactly what she had before she said it out loud. When she finished, Sarah Flores was quiet for a moment. Then she said, how long have you been trying to get someone to listen to this? Emily looked at the camera. 4 months, she said. But it was going to take as long as it took. That's just how it is sometimes. You keep going. You carry what you know. You find the next person to tell it to. She paused. Eventually someone listens. Behind her she heard an engine turn over. And another. 32 motorcycles, one after another, starting their engines at 11:55 in the morning on a Phoenix street. Not leaving, not revving, not performing, just running. The sound of them present and idling. A low, steady sound, like the sound of something that intended to remain. Sarah Flores glanced at them over Emily's shoulder. Who are they, she said. Emily turned and looked at the street full of leather vests and running engines and the faces of people who had driven to a precinct in the dark of a December morning for a girl they had never met. She turned back. They're people who showed up, she said. That's all. They just showed up. The call to her mother took 40 minutes on Reese Navarro's landline in the kitchen, while Noah built something out of Legos at the table and pretended not to listen, which Emily recognized as the pretense it was and didn't mind. Her mother's voice on the phone was the same as it always had been, a little rough, from the medications, warm underneath the roughness, the voice of someone who had faced things she hadn't chosen to face and had not been reduced by them. I saw you on the news, her mother said. Emily closed her eyes. Aunt Carol called me, her mother said. She had the Phoenix news on. She called me and she said, Betty, your daughter is on television. And I said, what did she do? And Carol said she saved a little boy from a fire. And I said, her mother stopped. A pause that had texture to it that was doing work. And I said, that sounds like her. Emily pressed the phone against her ear. Mom, she said, are your hands okay? They're burned a little. They're okay. Are you okay? And Emily sat in Reese's kitchen with her burned hands and her backpack and the folder and all 11 pages and the business card and the testimony she had just given and the camera she had just looked into and the 32 motorcycles she had not and asked for and had received anyway. And she thought about the word okay and the word she had been deploying for 4 months as a practical tool and a social courtesy, and sometimes as the last available defense between herself and the full weight of what she was inside of. And I think I'm going to be, she said. Her mother was quiet. And I'm coming, her mother said. Don't tell me I can't. And Mom, you're in Tucson. I'm in Tucson, not on the moon. And Carol has a car. I've been sitting in Tucson for 4 months while my daughter has been. Another pause, shorter this time. The pause of someone holding something back that does not need to be said because they both already know it. And I'm coming, she said again. Let me come. Emily looked at Noah across the table, who had stopped pretending to focus on the Legos and was looking at her with 8-year-old directness. And okay, she said, the fourth time, the easiest time. And the one that cost her nothing and gave her everything. And she hung up and sat for a moment. Noah set down the piece he'd been holding. And was that your mom? Yes. Is she coming? And yes. He nodded, satisfied, the way children are satisfied when information confirms what they already thought should happen. He picked up the Lego piece again. Good, he said. Reese has room. Emily looked at him. And she looked at the kitchen. And this ordinary, and abundant kitchen that Reese Navarro had simply made large enough for whoever showed up. And the way you could simply decide to do that. And to make room. And to set an extra place. She looked at her bandaged hands. And she thought about everything that came next, the investigation, and the testimony, and the other buildings, and the tenants, and the school she needed to return to, and the degree she was 2 semesters from completing, and the life she had been building before it was disrupted, and that she had been, and all along, and even in the worst of it, and still building. And she thought about all of it. And for the first time in 4 months, the 5 steps ahead did not feel like running. And it felt like direction. She was still here, still carrying, and still going, and now finally, and improbably, and in the way that the true stories always turn on something small, and a girl outside a building on a cold night counting lit windows, and a child coughing behind a closed door, and a man asking why now she was not carrying it alone. And Betty Carter arrived on a Thursday. And Carol's car pulled up to Reese's house in Sunnylope at 2 in the afternoon. And Emily was on the porch before the engine cut. And because she had been watching the street for 40 minutes, in the way she watched things quietly, and with her whole body, and the practiced attention of someone who had learned that the world delivered its most important arrivals without announcement. And her mother got out of the passenger side slowly, and with the careful movement of someone who had learned to negotiate with a body that didn't always cooperate, and she straightened up and looked at the house, and then looked at the porch and found Emily, and the look on her face was not relief, not exactly. Though relief was inside it, it was the look of a woman who had been carrying something at a distance for 4 months and had just been allowed to set it down. And Emily came down the steps. And they met on the front walk, and her mother put both arms around her without saying anything. And Emily, and who had not been held by anyone in 4 months, and who had been a person that the world walked past and through and around without contact, stood inside that and let it be what it was. And her mother pulled back and looked at her face, then at her hands. And let me see, she said. Mom, let me see, Emily. She held out her bandaged hands. And her mother took them, and carefully, and one at a time, and turning them over, and checking the bandaging with the attentive and unsentimental precision of a woman who had spent 2 years managing medical information about her own body and had gotten very good at understanding what she was looking at. And these were properly cleaned, she said. A doctor saw them yesterday, and Okafor set it up. The detective. And her mother looked up. The detective arranged for a doctor. And yes. Betty Carter looked at her daughter's face for a long moment with the particular searching attention of a mother, taking inventory of a child she has not seen in too long, and checking not just the surface, but what was underneath the surface, the things the surface might be concealing. And You look thin, she said. I'm okay. You look thin and tired, and like you've been holding something very heavy for a very long time. And Emily did not argue with any of that. Come inside, she said. And Reese made lunch. Her mother looked at the house, and then at the street. She had registered 2 motorcycles parked at the curb. There were always at least 2 now. Dex had organized it without being asked. And a rotation that ran from 6 in the morning to 10 at night, and she had not said anything about them in the way that mothers sometimes don't say things because they are processing them and will say them when they are ready. And the Hells Angels parked outside your house, her mother said. And that's something I didn't think I would be saying today. And they're not my house, Emily said. They're outside Reese's house. She paused, finding the right word. They're friends. Her mother looked at her. Okay, Betty Carter said. And the word in her mouth had the same quality it had in Emily's compact, loaded, meaning more than its letters suggested. She took her daughter's arm and they went inside. Reese fed Betty like she fed everyone, with the matter-of-fact abundance that Emily had stopped being surprised by and started simply receiving, which was itself a form of progress. Noah sat at the table and told Betty, in comprehensive and largely accurate detail, the story of the fire and Emily carrying him out, including the detail about Emily asking him to put his arms around her neck, which he delivered with the gravity of someone recounting a significant moment in history. Betty listened to all of it with her hands wrapped around a coffee cup and her eyes moving between Noah and Emily. When Noah finished, Betty looked at Emily and said nothing. She didn't need to. Emily looked at her plate. Reese refilled the coffee, and the conversation moved, and the kitchen did the thing that kitchens with enough people in them do, which is generate its own warmth, its own forward motion, the momentum of ordinary life continuing in the vicinity of extraordinary things, and by that continuation, making the extraordinary things bearable. Jackson arrived at 4. He came through the door the way he always came through Reese's door, which was without knocking, which was itself information about the relationship between these people, the long-established intimacy of a chosen family that had its own grammar. He stopped when he saw Betty. He looked at Emily. My mom, Emily said. Jackson crossed the kitchen and put out his hand. Jackson Hayes, he said. Betty looked at his hand. She shook it. She looked at him with the same careful inventory she had applied to Emily's bandages, the maternal assessment that required no particular credential, and apologized for nothing. You're the father, she said. Yes, ma'am. Of the boy she carried out. Yes, ma'am. Betty nodded slowly, the nod of someone arriving at a conclusion they had been working toward. She didn't tell me your name on the phone, she said. She said, there are people helping me now. I didn't know what that meant. Jackson looked at Emily. Emily looked at her plate again. It meant what it means, Jackson said. She needed people around her, and now she has them. Betty Carter looked at him for another long moment. She needed people around her 4 months ago, she said quietly. Not an accusation. A statement of fact, the kind that comes from somewhere deep in a person, the accounting of a mother who has been separated from her child by circumstances neither of them chose, and who has been carrying the weight of that distance every single day. Yes, Jackson said. She did. The kitchen was quiet. Noah was looking at Betty with the wide, reading attention he turned on everything that mattered. But she's got them now, Jackson said. And that counts. Betty looked at him. Something shifted in her face, a wall that had been doing its job now allowed to rest. Yes, she said, it does. 2 weeks after the statement, Dennis Warwick resigned from the city council. He released a statement through his attorney citing personal reasons and the need to spend time with family, which was the language of a man whose attorneys had looked at what the assistant district attorney's office had assembled and made a calculation. Moss called Okafor. Okafor called Emily. Emily was at the library at the 3rd table on the left when her phone rang. Warwick resigned this morning, Okafor said. Emily sat very still. Does that affect the investigation? It does not, Okafor said. Resignation isn't immunity. The investigation proceeds. It may in fact accelerate certain conversations that have been slow to develop. A brief pause. His chief of staff contacted us yesterday through a private attorney. Earned. Cooperating, exploring options, Okafor said, which is cooperation in a suit. Earned. Emily looked at the table in front of her. She had brought the folder out of habit, even though she had given Okafor copies of everything, because carrying it had become a form of muscle memory, and she wasn't ready to stop. Earned. The building manager, she said. Hollister. Arraigned this morning. Earned. Criminal negligence, fraud, falsification of public records. Okafor's voice was professional level. Earned. He made bail. And the property management company owner. Earned. Under investigation. No charges yet. It's coming. Earned. Emily closed the folder. The tenants, she said. The ones from the Maricopa Arms and the other two buildings. Earned. City Housing Authority has opened emergency relocation assistance for all three properties. Earned. All three buildings are under mandatory inspection holds. Earned. No one is being forced back into an unsafe unit. Okafor paused. Earned. That part, Emily, that part is partly because of what you put in front of us. Earned. Directly. Emily put her hand flat on the folder. She thought about the woman with the cane on the second floor. Earned. The man who pressed his forehead to his door. The sound of children through open windows. Earned. Okay, she said. This time the word was quiet, simple. A door closing softly on something that had been open too long. Earned. Donna appeared at her elbow with 2 cups of coffee, set one down without being asked, and went back to the desk without a word. Earned. Emily picked up the coffee. She sat in the library where she had spent 4 months building the case that was now in the hands of people with the power to act on it, and she drank her coffee. And outside the library windows, Phoenix was going about its business in the ordinary way of cities that contain extraordinary things without always knowing it. Earned. The twist came from Reyes. He called her on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after the arraignment, while she was in the middle of her first week back at classes. Earned. She had re-enrolled for the spring semester with a scholarship need-based, awarded through the nursing school's emergency fund, applied for with the help of a woman named Dr. Earned. Patricia Solano, who was the department head and who had called Emily personally when the application came across her desk and had said, in the direct way of a woman with 30 years in nursing education, I remember you. And we should have done more to keep you. Let me fix that. And Reyes said, we found a third account. Emily stopped walking. And she was on the path between the campus library and the clinical skills building, and she stopped in the middle of the path, and a student walked around her. And what kind of account, she said. A private escrow account connected to a shell entity. And the shell entity receives payments from 3 Meridian subsidiaries. Payments correspond in amount and timing to the dates the inspection reports were falsified. Reyes paused. And the account has a signatory. Warwick, she said. And no, Reyes said. That's the thing. It's not Warwick. And Emily stood very still. Then who? Deputy Director of the City Housing Authority, Reyes said. And a woman named Sandra Cho. The name hit Emily like a flat hand against a wall. And Sandra Cho. Sandra from the Housing Authority Constituent Services line, who had been very polite and very thorough about explaining all the ways in which Emily's concerns were very valid and also not anything anyone was currently able to address. And Sandra, who had taken her calls, who had heard her describe the building, and who had known from the inside of the very office responsible for housing safety exactly what Emily had and exactly what it meant. And she took my calls, Emily said, in October. She spoke to me directly. And I know, Reyes said. We know. That's going to matter in court. And Emily started walking again. Not because she had anywhere to be in the next 60 seconds. And because she needed to move. She was the one who told me my concerns were valid, Emily said. Those exact words. She used those exact words and then she did nothing. And she did something, Reyes said. She made a phone call to Meridian's legal counsel 30 minutes after she spoke to you. And we have the phone record. Emily stopped walking again. And the world had a very specific quality in that moment, the bright and flat quality of a truth arriving that reorganizes everything around it, and that makes you go back over every previous moment and see it differently. And the file clerk who has been misfiling things suddenly revealed the shape of what was being hidden now visible in what was being disclosed. And Sandra Cho had not been a bureaucrat moving slowly through inadequate systems. And Sandra Cho had been a gatekeeper. positioned exactly where someone needed to be, positioned to intercept complaints before they reached the people who would actually act on them. Polite, thorough, earned. Professional, earned, and precisely placed, earned. The $41,000, Emily said. Warwick was the visible one, earned. Cho was the functional one, Reyes said. Warwick provided political cover, earned. Cho controlled the administrative pathway. Together they made the complaints disappear, earned. And neither of them expected anyone to keep pushing after Sandra told them their concerns were valid, Emily said. Nobody had before, Reyes said. You were the first one who didn't stop, earned. Emily stood on the campus path in the January morning and held her phone and felt the full length of it, the 4 months and the 11 pages and the phone calls and the library computers and the folder in the dumpster and every single person who earned had told her, in professional language and with genuine sounding regret, that her concerns were valid and also unactionable. And is she being charged, Ep? Emily said. Warrants are being issued this afternoon, Reyes said. Earned. I'm telling you first because you're going to hear about it, and I wanted you to have context. He paused. Earned. Also because you're the reason we found the account. Earned. The connection to the escrow came from the campaign finance thread you started pulling. Earned. Emily said nothing for a moment. Emily, Reyes said. Earned. Yes, she said. And this time, for the first time in a long time, the word was fully accurate. And not a deflection, not a practical tool. The simple, honest truth. And she hung up and stood on the path and breathed cold January air. And then she called Jackson. He picked up on the first ring. And they found another account, she said. The Housing Authority. And it goes deeper than Warwick. A pause. A brief, expressive silence. Tell me, he said. She told him. When she finished, he was quiet for 4 seconds. And Sandra Cho, he said. Yes. The one who took your calls. And yes. Emily. His voice had something in it she recognized as the particular anger of a man who is too controlled to let it run loose but too honest to conceal that it's there. And she heard what you had and then called the lawyers. And yes. While you were sleeping outside, the words landed. And yes, she said. The silence between them held everything it needed to hold. And warrants this afternoon, she said. Reyes told me first. And good, Jackson said. That's how it should be. She heard him breathe. And she heard, in the background, the sound of something mechanical, a shop, a garage, the ordinary noise of his day that her call had interrupted and that he had answered on the first ring anyway. How are you, he said. She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. I'm in my second week of classes, she said. My hands are mostly healed. My mother is staying at Reese's for another week. Noah showed me his science project yesterday, and it was about structural load-bearing in buildings, and I think he may have done it on purpose. She paused. I'm okay, Jackson. I'm actually okay. Good, he said. The word warm, simple, final. I have a clinical skills lab in 20 minutes, she said. And go, he said. She went. The sentencing for Gary Hollister, the building manager, came in March. 14 months. The property company owner negotiated a plea and received 2 years plus restitution to displaced tenants. Sandra Cho went to trial and was convicted on 4 counts of fraud and 1 count of criminal conspiracy. Warwick, whose attorney had been exploring options since December, cooperated fully in exchange for a reduced charge, and the cooperation was what allowed Moss to build the conspiracy case that put Sandra Cho away. Emily was in the courtroom for the verdict. She sat in the gallery in a clean shirt with her hands, fully healed now, folded in her lap, and she listened to the word guilty said 4 times and once more, and she felt each one land with the particular weight of a truth that has waited a long time to be officially confirmed. Okafor was across the courtroom. She caught Emily's eye, and she gave her a nod, the same kind of nod as Dex on the porch steps, small and specific and meaning something precise. Emily nodded back. She did not cry. She did not feel the dramatic release that stories suggested she should feel. What she felt was quieter than that, the feeling of a thing having been completed that needed to be completed, the way a surgical wound closes. Not dramatic, not sudden, just the tissue doing what tissue does when given the right conditions and enough time. She walked out of the courthouse into a March afternoon. Jackson was on the steps. He had not been inside, he had not been asked to be there, and he had not pushed to be. But he was on the steps, because he had known when the verdict was expected, and he had come, the way he came to things now, without announcement, without performance, simply there, guilty, she said. All counts, all counts. He put his hand briefly on her shoulder, quick, solid, the gesture of someone who knows the difference between a moment that calls for words and a moment that calls for presence, and then dropped it. Noah wants to take you to dinner, he said, his idea. He's been planning it for a week. Emily looked at him. He made a reservation, Jackson said. He called the restaurant himself. He told them it was a special occasion. He paused. I have no idea how an 8-year-old knows how to make a restaurant reservation, but he did it. Emily felt something move through her that was warm and uncomplicated and real. The feeling that 8-year-olds who make restaurant reservations for special occasions were among the most reliable evidence that the world contained more good than you could see on any given day. Tell him yes, she said. He's going to make a speech, Jackson warned. He's been practicing. I know, she said. I heard him through the wall last night. Jackson looked at her. You were at Reese's last night? Mom needed the car to go back to Tucson and I drove her. I stayed over, she paused. Reese told me to stay in the same room as before. She said it was mine if I needed it. Jackson said nothing. She could see him deciding not to make something of it, the deliberate choice of a man who understood that some things were better received when they were not remarked upon. Noah's speech, Emily said. What's it about you? Jackson said. Obviously, she said. They stood on the courthouse steps in the March afternoon, and Phoenix moved around them, indifferent and alive, the way cities are, carrying their extraordinary things in their ordinary motion, and Emily Carter stood in it and felt, for the first time since she could clearly remember, that she was not outside the motion but inside it, not walking alongside the city but through it, of it, part of it, in the particular way you become part of a place when the place has witnessed something true about you and not looked away. She thought about the night she had counted 37 lit windows. She thought about the cold air on her burned hands. She thought about the word nobody had thought to say to a girl sleeping on a concrete ledge outside a building nobody was watching. Stay. Nobody had said it, but she had stayed anyway. She had stayed when it was hard, and she had stayed when nobody was watching, and when staying required a kind of faith she could not have named or defended, only practiced, one cold night at a time. And everything that had followed the folder, the testimony, the motorcycles, the verdict, the scholarship, the restored room at the end of Reese's Hall, Noah's restaurant reservation, Jackson on courthouse steps, her mother's arms on a front walk in January. Everything had followed not from luck, not from rescue, but from that, from staying, from believing that the next step existed before she could see it, from walking into a burning building, not because she was brave enough, but because she was present enough, because she had been there, paying attention, when it mattered. That was the whole story. A girl that nobody saw, who saw everything, who kept going, and who had, in the end, made the city see itself more clearly, not because she had been given a platform or a microphone or a hand up at the right moment, but because she had been too stubborn to become invisible inside her own invisibility, too careful and too honest and too certain of what she knew to let it die in a voicemail or a waiting list or a politely worded dead end. Emily Carter had walked into a fire. The fire had changed everything. Not the fire in the building, though, that too. That also, the fire that had lit up the third floor of the Maricopa Arms on West Van Buren and shown the city briefly, the face of something it had been failing to see. The fire she had carried in herself, the one that had not gone out. That was the one that mattered. That was the one that always mattered. And it was still burning.